Welcome to the Morality Lens podcast. The views and opinions shared here are our own, rooted in biblical principles and moral conviction. This podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, medical, or professional advice. Our goal is to speak truth in love and encourage thoughtful reflection. Above all, we seek to inspire open, honest, and peaceful conversations, just as Charlie Kirk did. And we ask you to carry that same spirit of respect and kindness into every setting, both private and public. Thank you for respecting this message and enjoy the podcast.
And of course, please consider liking and subscribing. How's it going again, friends? And welcome back to the Morality Lens podcast. My name is Dylan, and I am very thankful and grateful that you are back with me again. And if this is your first time here, welcome. So, in this week's episode, we will go back into the book of Proverbs and just do another study with that, with chapter number 4 out of 31. And in this chapter, the general idea here is that it emphasizes the importance of seeking wisdom and understanding for a righteous life. And, the thing that comes to mind here is Solomon having the vibe of a father talking to a child and giving instruction and lessons. And teaching children does come to mind with this. David Guzik once said, the home is the central place of learning. And when we think of this, we think of schooling, right? So we have these public and private and Christian schools, but there's also homeschooling as well. And we're not going to diminish these types of schooling by any means, but we need to understand that no schooling compares to the life and wisdom lessons that's in the Word, and of course we do mean godly lessons here, and I think that's just a general idea on what this chapter is about. So starting with verses 1 and 2, "Hear, my children, the instruction of a father, and give attention to know understanding, for I give you good doctrine. Do not forsake my law." So Solomon here is asking his son to listen closely, because what Solomon will say is very valuable information and would be essentially ill-advised to challenge the teaching or to not pay any attention to it or be careless about. And a lot of times we have this valuable information go in one ear and out the other when it's spoken. And there's times where we even may moan and groan over it, but we need to understand and be mature enough to recognize that it is valuable information. And having wisdom as a child means paying attention and listening to the parent. But did we do that all the time as children? Probably not. But when we read these verses, it emphasizes the importance of listening to the parents and just the overall importance of wisdom. So verses 3 through 5, "When I was my father's son, tender, and the only one in the sight of my mother, he also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words. Keep my commands and live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth." So it mentions the mentions of Solomon as a child here in the presence of his father, explaining and teaching Solomon the same lessons that his father taught him and the lessons that Solomon learned when he was a child. This shows the passing down of knowledge from generation to generation, and it kind of reminds me of the passing down of some kind of ancient family item. It could be anything, these ancient items. A lot of times we see them as watches or jewelry or some type of books and so on and so on. But none of these, compare to the passing down of godly wisdom. And if we take a look at Solomon, his father was King David, and it's the same King David that defeated Goliath and could possibly be, Israel's greatest king. Imagine hearing a lesson of wisdom from King David during that time. And I try to put myself in that, and I would find it just to be really fascinating to be in that presence. And it shows that these overall lessons have stood the test of time, because a lot of them are still applied to this very day. And verse 4 mentions retaining to live. So how do we do this? That is listening closely and asking questions and studying. This needs to be done when we become wise and we start to have this wisdom-filled lifestyle. And by live, he may mean living a transformed life of a wisdom-filled, godly person. And verse 5 mentions getting wisdom. It's one thing to gain possession of wisdom, but we also need to pursue it. And why might this be? Well, there's always room for more wisdom and knowledge, because we are not perfect by any means. We never have, and we never will be. And there's only one that's perfect, and we know who that is. So verses 6 through 9, do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and in all your getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. She will place on your head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory she will deliver to you. So we start to see the benefits of gaining understanding and wisdom, like in some of the previous chapters. An example here is, if we love wisdom, wisdom will love us in return. And by pursuing wisdom, we will gain things like honor and grace and humility, among many other things. But I think an important thing here is to not pursue wisdom for recognition. And there's often times where we do things just to be seen or heard or valued by another person. But we don't need to do this when we are walking with God. We're not supposed to do things in the pursuit of recognition for it. We pursue wisdom because you crave it and desire it. So verses 10 through 13, hear my son and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in right paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Take firm hold of instruction. Do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. So we see more of the fallout of following wisdom and what happens when we do this. And because we have valued and understood wisdom and what we have, we have the tools to navigate the moments that we need wisdom. And because we have been obedient, we will live many years, and we walk rightly, and we will just cherish wisdom for life, and then pass it on to our children one day, so they can pass it on to their children, and so on and so on. And again, we still gain more wisdom each day we seek it, but we become more confident in our abilities to do so pretty much every day. And some may point out that Solomon had pride in verse 12, but the problem with that argument is that Solomon just passed down, what his father David taught him. And, it's one thing to, like I said, to just pursue wisdom for the recognition, but David passed down the wisdom to Solomon, his son, because he is his son. It's out of love. We all know this. And, Solomon is just doing the same exact thing that David did. He isn't boasting or bragging by any means. He's just guiding his son into the direction of God, since nobody knows wisdom better than God does anyway. And overall, in a general sense, why would we not want to guide our children into God's direction? Solomon showing his son this is beautiful to see, and including when parents of today do that same thing. It's awesome to see when they teach and they guide them into a godly lifestyle. And using God's wisdom is really the only way to teach. And oftentimes we see parents of today try to teach, and then the kids run off, with this advice, and they end up stumbling not long after, because we have to wonder if the parents really did use godly wisdom with this. And this is why we need to be 1,000% sure with what we teach. Is that teaching what God would approve of? And is it also accurate to what Solomon is teaching his son, for example? Verses 14 through 17. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they do not sleep unless they have done evil, and their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. We see in this entire section, it's a warning from Solomon to his son, with the explanation about those who do evil in the eyes of the Lord, and explain how they are and what they do. And a key phrase that stuck out to me was, do not enter. And if we actively take a stand and not enter this path that Solomon is referring to, then we're showing a great deal of wisdom and strength and courage as well, because it can be super tempting to do, and resisting that temptation is using this wisdom. We're saying no before those who actively do evil could even start their nonsense. And it reminds me of when it rains all day, like when we get one of those days that rains heavily all day long. We say no to outdoor plans. And why is this? Because we could get sick, obviously. And those who thrive on doing evil are so committed to doing these things. It's said that they literally won't sleep until they make someone fail or stumble or fall. And it just really shows the extreme lengths that these sorts of people are willing to go, to where they're not allowed to sleep until they make someone fall. And that's really saying something, and it cannot emphasize enough, the warning that comes with that. Verses 18 and 19. But the path of the just is like the shining sun, that shines even brighter, ever brighter, unto the perfect day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. We now get an easy breakdown of the two paths that are always in front of us. As we know, the one path of evil has no light, and it is something we need to avoid, like it's mentioned in the previous section. And the enemy doesn't want us to see this path of light. And of course, the path of light is the path that God is on. And why do you think he tries so hard and so desperately to distract us with, temptation and worldly things? But ultimately, we can't let him succeed at this. The enemy doesn't want us to even mention or see or hear about this pathway of God's glory. And we can't emphasize enough to be super, super careful with this. The second path, like I said, is the one that God is on, which is full of light and prosperity and love and peace. It shines like the sun is just the perfect description for this. And when we are just in God's eyes, and we realize this, we just, have something about us where someone who isn't walking with God would wonder, what is going on with us, and what is going on. And some may scoff at it, but some would just be curious about it too. They may ask us questions like how or why. And those on the path, all they know, on the first path anyway, all they know is causing chaos and bringing people to where they are and the path that they're on. So they don't know what would trip them up, because they're always on that same way. And it kind of reminds me of a predator like a shark. Those creatures are hunters, and they don't really care what or whom they consume when they eat. And of course they have their preferences of what they like and don't like, but how many times do we see stories of somebody out in the water getting bitten by a shark or something? So verses 20 through 22, "My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to all their flesh." So once again, Solomon gives a heartfelt plea to his son to really hear what he's saying closely and pretty much tattoo it in his mind. And many times, like I said before, wisdom is heard, but it's not received. And there's a big difference there. In other words, it goes in one ear and out the other. The words are being heard, but they're just not attaching to our minds and hearts. And I think a lot of us do this, and it's a very common thing. When the phrase "keeping in the midst of your heart" I find to be interesting. We could say, "let wisdom travel to our heart," and I think there's just more to it. And we have to ask ourselves, what about transformation? God doesn't just want us to just hear his words and his blessings and his wisdom. God just wants us to hear them at our hearts and let it sink into our heart. So 2 Corinthians 3 verse 18 says, "And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into this image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." Accepting words of wisdom is also very healthy, and I would say that it's better than any diet or exercise could ever offer. So verses 23 through 27, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put your perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil. So we see the word diligence, and it means steady and persistent effort. If our hearts are set on wisdom and discernment, we will be able to navigate all these issues that come up. And I do understand that it says spring the issues of life, which sounds like the issues will spring up like some kind of flower that's growing in the ground. However, if we know even a little bit of who God is, we know He doesn't put problems and worries in our lives. He does put opportunities and lessons and teachings in our lives, though, and we could all use these lessons at pretty much at any point in our lives. And then we hear about a deceitful mouth and perverse lips. We need to not let this be our first response at information that is received. And it's easy to react in the way of our flesh, and we just need to really take a second to not do that sort of thing. If someone comes at us aggressively with accusations or looking for an argument, for example, we can't let their words trigger us to say something that's like what they're saying. And it's always easy to respond back at somebody with insults or things that just put people down. And it's always more righteous to respond with kindness. And then we need to keep our eyes focused on God. Do not pay attention to what others are doing or the world around us. A lot of us fall victim to that, unfortunately. And the enemy constantly wants us to be distracted from God. We can't let him do this. And we can't worry about where God is leading us either. We need to think of it like, I wonder what amazing or righteous thing God is leading me towards. And as we walk this path, just let the teachings happen, just let the lessons happen, and just let His plan unfold. And we gain more wisdom and experience from it when we do this. And when it says, do not turn to the right or left, God's path is always straight. It doesn't have these winding roads or potholes or sudden stops or changes in the road. It's always a perfectly paved roadway going in that one direction. And it's important to not speed ahead and, go 90 miles an hour in a 50 mile an hour zone, for example. Follow the speed limit and the leader, which is God. Don't make any sudden left or right turns or whatever the case is. I would say maybe even ignore that turn signal that's on the steering wheel there. Turning right and left is like turning away from God. And if this ever does happen, which I pray that it doesn't happen to any of us, we need to be sure to get back on God's path as quickly and safely as possible. So I hope that this study of Proverbs chapter 4 has helped gain a little bit of understanding, a little bit further understanding of wisdom and who God is, and just anything about righteousness as well. And of course, like I always say, that you are seen and deeply valued here, but also more importantly by God Himself. And always be sure to reach out to Him for prayer when you need it, and spend time with Him as much as you can, because He delights in that, and you just never know what will be revealed. So I do pray for all of you out there. If you're going through something, or just in general, I do pray for you in your life. And I hope you have a great day. God bless you all.